show will be on infertility tourism, otherwise known as cross-border reproductive care. Our guest to talk about how to go abroad for infertility treatment will be Laurie DeBrito. She is the co-founder and vice president of globalivf.com. And we also have Taurus Kuzin. He is the founder and CEO of MedVacations. Welcome, both of you, to Creating a Family.
Thank you.
Well, delighted to be here.
Good. Now, today we're going to be talking primarily about IVF and egg donation. We decided to have a separate show exclusively on surrogacy abroad, and that show, just for our listeners, is scheduled for July 20th. Laurie, what is the primary reason that you find that people go abroad for fertility treatment?
Mainly financial, believe it or not. I think if most people could afford to do IVF and egg donation in their own country, and that means anywhere in the world, they would choose to stay there. But in general, the main reasons for going abroad are financial, legal reasons. Perhaps you cannot do it in your own country if we're talking about egg donation or sex selection or something like that. So you have financial, legal, and sometimes availability of resources. Sometimes the IVF clinics are better in another country. The statistics for success are potentially higher.
Do you find that most people go abroad after they've gone through treatment in the U.S. or their home country, or do they go abroad as their first choice, Taurus?
People who come to us typically have gone through several IVF cycles here in the United States, and I want to mention that our company focuses on the U.S. market, so we don't talk about other countries, so everything is related to the U.S. markets. So people who come to us typically have gone through several IVF cycles. They exhausted their financial resources. They still wish to have the baby, and then basically looking for alternatives.
You know, and Laura, you mentioned something when you first spoke about one of the reasons might be that people might go abroad would be for their success rates and things like that. And that raises an interesting question because do clinics abroad keep the same type of statistics that U.S. clinics keep?
That's part of the problem. No, there is no, here in the United States we have resources where they collect data and you have to be basically certified with the company, and the information that you're going to collect will be real. It's, by SART. Although the problem with that is it's a couple of years behind the data for across the United States on donor egg success or even IVF success. When you go abroad, there is no one group that collects the data. So you're basically going clinic to clinic self-reporting. There are several countries where they're trying to collect the data and have one resource so that you could feel confident that you're getting the right information, but that hasn't happened yet.
Which are the countries that are trying to collect?
I know in Spain they were trying to, and there's I can't remember the name, I'm sorry, but there's one organization that's trying to do it globally. At least go and look at the clinics and make sure that the clinics are up to a certain level, a certain standard. But in general, you don't find the same information abroad as you do in the United States. A lot of clinics in the United States self-report too, because again, the information that is collected domestically is usually about 2 years, I believe, behind.
Yeah, it depends on whether you're going to the CDC site or the SART site,
Society
for Assisted Reproductive Technology. The SART site being 1 year more up to date than the CDC site. But okay, so one thing that people could do is contact the clinics and ask for their stats, but then, and not trying to be cynical here, but Taurus, how do they know that these stats are accurate?
Well, it's interesting because, Don, we actually work with U.S. accredited facilities or some other organizations that accredit IVF clinics abroad. So basically, one of our selling points, we always tell clinics, our clinics are accredited here in the United States. So everything we say and tell you about the statistics are actually verifiable here in the States.
But I don't understand that. How would a clinic that's operated in, I don't know, India, Spain, wherever, be accredited in the United States? How does that work?
this is how it works. So basically, by the way, we do not work with clinics in India, and for several reasons. I'm sure there are great clinics in India, but unfortunately, Indian clinics are very far away from here. It typically requires over 20-hour trip. So we try to locate IVF clinics closer to the United States, so that obviously travel is a big issue, and also vacation is a big issue for many IVF patients from the United States. But basically, I'll give you an example. There is a clinic in Moscow. It's CAP accredited. And CAP accreditation, as you may know, is a major accreditation here in the United States. So everything, that was one of the steps in the evaluation process. There's a organization in Israel that accredits IVF clinics, so we had to turn to that one too. And basically, when we go and visit with the clinics, embryologists, directors of those clinics, we ask for paperwork and some sort of proof that the clinics are accredited, and also show the statistics.
But they're still not reporting to a central organization like CDC or STAR.
Absolutely. Lori is correct. Yes.
So, Lori, how would somebody? Is there maybe the answer is they wouldn't. But let's say let's actually expand the question. If you're calling to say both what type of accreditation do you have, and what are your statistics, your success statistics? What type of accreditation should they look for, and is there any way to determine the veracity of the information you're getting?
To my understanding, there isn't. So unfortunately, when somebody is looking to go abroad, it is sort of blindly. What we're trying to do at Global IVF is at least give information as much as we know, and it's coming in constantly, so that you can have make an informed decision. But basically, at this point, I would tell people to call, speak with somebody. A lot of times, the communication or email in general, probably email first and set up a Skype with somebody. You want somebody who you can communicate with in the clinic. So obviously, either the intended parent needs to speak the home language of the clinic they're calling, or you need to find a clinic that speaks English. The communication aspect will be very, very important. It will make you feel comfortable about what you're doing. It will make you feel confident about what you're doing. My feeling is you need to take any statistic information that the clinic is giving you with a grain of salt. It's the same thing in the United States. If you call a clinic here and they report, 90% success rates, well, you don't really have proof. They'll send you a sheet of paper that says we're doing 90% success rates. You don't have any proof. It's the same way around the world with asking clinics. So what we say is do your homework, communicate with the clinic, ask them about references, people you can talk to. Obviously, they're going to send people that have had success, but at least that will help you, again, feel more confident and better informed about your decision.
I couldn't agree with Lori. More with Lori. Basically, yeah, and that's the reason why the whole medical tourism exists, actually, if you think about it. Companies like Med Vacation actually facilitates everything Lori just mentioned a moment ago, and we are that intermediary that does that groundwork for our patients. We see the patients go into the clinic. We see the patients coming back pregnant or not pregnant. We get the feedback from those clinics, and we get the feedback from clients saying whether the experience was great, whether it was horrible, what they would like to improve, things like that. So that's the reason companies like ours actually exist and help U.S. patients.
And Global IVF, I'm sure, as well.
Exactly, except ours is more
Yeah.
informational. Whereas obviously, like what Taras is saying, he does work for a medical tourism company, which we actually think is a wonderful idea. There's several of them. But again, the intended parent doing the research needs to remember that obviously it's a business, and it is a big business. But I think companies like what Taras is doing are very important, because then at least you can speak with people. They will have real people who have gone through the process, who either are pregnant or not. And I would actually recommend for intended parents to ask about the ones who are not pregnant. Because oftentimes if they say, you know what, I didn't get pregnant, but I had a really good experience, that's sometimes more valuable than the person who got pregnant.
Okay, now let's talk about what are the most popular countries for people to go abroad? And again, we're not necessarily talking about surrogacy here. We're more talking, it may be the same with surrogacy as well, but for IVF and for egg donation. Now, Taurus, you could tell us which countries you guys actually work with, but then, Lori, I'd like for you to chime in with perhaps more other countries that might also be open. So let's start with you, Taurus.
We have evaluated several countries and several IVF clinics prior to opening our business a couple of years ago. And basically, we chose facilities in Panama City, Panama, in Kiev, Ukraine, and Moscow, Russia. And the reason for that is, like for instance, Panama is very close. But again, like everything else in this world, any option has pros and cons to it. So basically, we just recommend our patients, our clients, a clinic based on their personal preferences and based on their personal situation.
Okay, Laurie, how about you? What other countries are popular? Let's focus on for the U.S. going abroad.
Okay, there are a lot of countries that you have to divide it into straight IVF or egg donor, because a lot of countries have IVF, but legally they cannot do egg donation. So, for instance, Turkey is a pretty good place to go for IVF, but egg donation is illegal there. So I'm going to first talk generally about egg donation, since that seems to be even a higher number of people going abroad for that and not just strictly for IVF. Greece, Turkey, South America, Spain, those are Czech Republic, India. Well, you don't find as many people going to India strictly for egg donation, because again, if you're American, you're looking, most of the time they're looking for somebody who looks like them, so it tends to be more European. Yes, we see people going to South America, we see people going to Panama, but it's still within the range of Caucasian, basically. When you go to India, it's less likely that you will find what people tend to choose then, if they're Caucasian, would be a lighter-skinned Indian woman. So what we find anyway is that they're mainly going to those European, the Eastern Europe, and South America for egg donation. Of the
Eastern European countries, the Czech Republic, which other ones do you see people going to? And I appreciate that you're dividing it between egg donation and IVF. So for egg donation, you've mentioned the Czech Republic. What other Eastern European countries do you see people? I'm
trying to think now. Those really are the main, that's really the main one. Ukraine, I would say Czech Republic and Ukraine are the highest.
Okay. Now,
but did I mention also a lot of people are going to Greece for egg donation too? That's a big one.
And in South America, you didn't mention specific countries.
In general, you know what, I don't have enough information to tell you confidently which countries there, but I know Argentina for one, and obviously Panama.
And Mexico in addition to that list, yes.
Okay. So for egg donation, we're talking Greece, Turkey, Argentina, Panama, Mexico, Spain, Czech Republic, and Ukraine as the big ones. That's not obviously an exclusive.
Oh, I'm sorry. One other place I just forgot. South Africa is a huge place, a huge draw for people from America going abroad. It's a lot further away. Like Tara said, that sometimes keeps people from going because they don't have the funds to travel, and also the time element. But a lot of people, the clinics in South Africa, I have not been there myself, but I hear that they're pretty good. The success rates are pretty good, and you can you can actually get a little more information about your egg donor, and it's an exotic place to visit. So that's another big one, too.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Absolutely. And also, if I may add to what Laura just said, South Africa is another popular destination for African-American clients. We have lost a couple of potential clients in the past because we could not provide a wide variety of egg donors with African-American background.
I just wanted to bring up, we actually found, we also have a concierge service to help individual clients do something abroad, do IVF or egg donation or surrogacy abroad. And we actually had an African-American intended mom looking for an egg donor, and we found her African-American a donor in Spain. And now most people wouldn't think that. The other thing, too, I didn't mention, Barbados is another location that people can go to for egg donation as well, and there you can find more ethnicities, even if you're Asian, Caucasian, African American. They have more of a blend of people, so if you're of a particular ethnicity, that might be an option for you too.
Okay. Now, if you're not looking for egg donation, then and you're looking just for IVF, what are the popular countries? And I would imagine, Laura, you'd be the better one to answer this, since Taurus has told us where they work. So where in the world would people go for IVF if they were looking abroad?
Belgium, Turkey. Those are the two main ones that I hear. Again, a lot of the same places, though, too.
Right.
You know, Spain
is right.
Exactly. So especially a lot of British people just go, because it's a short flight, actually. So
yeah.
Hopping over to Belgium is not a big deal to do IVF. We don't find that many Americans leaving America strictly for IVF because, to be honest, with the economic situation, even though people can't afford it, the clinics have come down somewhat in prices, and you really should try and negotiate. There are definitely clinics that have good statistics that are offering special discount rates. So if it's strictly IVF, and we're talking about Americans, I would say look first here. Do your research here. Egg donation is a different story because you're then adding about $5,000 to $15,000 onto the price. Then it begins to make sense to look abroad.
You know, I'm glad you raised that because there are certainly clinics who are working to keep the cost of IVF reasonable. Well, maybe that's some people would disagree with that my choice of words there. I have no doubt. But it is possible. Now, this is not for with meds, but it is without medication. It is possible to do a cycle, particularly when we combine an IVF cycle. When you combine some of the multi-cycle packages and things like that. It is certainly possible, and particularly with the options, and we're going to talk about this later with going abroad, but with embryo freezing, it is certainly possible and to keep the cost at least down somewhat here in the U.S., and you do have some of the advantages of being in the United States. So I'm very glad you brought that up. And and actually, from our experience here at Creating a Family, we have seen exactly the same thing, that most people who are thinking about going abroad it's only once they move up the infertility ladder and they are at this point thinking, although not exclusively, because I have seen people go abroad for IVF.
Can I interrupt you 1 second? Yeah. As you're talking, things are coming into my head. We actually have had two other clients who, one, they had family in Thailand. They actually weren't Thai. They were Indian, but they had family in Thailand, and they ended up doing several straight IVF cycles there. Unfortunately, none of them worked. They came back to the United States and did a cycle, and their surrogate is pregnant now. But they had a wonderful experience, and maybe that was because they had family there, so it didn't feel as foreign to them, because that's a big aspect. Also, I've seen people in the United States who have family in Israel go to Israel for straight IVF, because, again, there's a comfort level there if you have family, and the costs are cheaper, and the medical facilities and standards are pretty darn high as well compared to the United States. So those are some reasons why an American might go abroad for, strictly IVF would be if they've got family in a certain country.
We've talked a lot about money, but let's talk dollars and cents now. And Taurus, give us a range of how much a full IVF cycle would cost abroad. And give us, if it varies by country, let's talk country.
Sure. Actually, again, the prices are pretty much comparable in all three countries, but there are several factors that go into calculating one's IVF package. Location, obviously the extent of the IVF, whether they need such technologies and instruments like PGD, comprehensive chromosome screen, freezing, things like that. But typically what we see, an average IVF package that we offer is around $8,200, and that includes everything:
now,
IVF treatments, flight, hotel accommodation.
I'm sorry, Taurus. That's for egg donation, though, and I think you should, right?
No, that's for
straight
the
IVF.
Straight IVF. Yeah,
okay.
Using own eggs.
So, Does that include the meds? Does that include infertility meds?
It includes menopause. But then, unfortunately, again, we cannot predict how much medication the patient will use. We try, and we can give an estimate, and we have a page on our website that talks about this. But basically, until we start administering the meds, we cannot see how much medication the patient may need. And we have many situations when we started with a certain amount of medication, we had to bump it up because the patient was not responding well.
So do you have a range for your clients that you give them and say, well, you know, it could be in this range depending upon how much meds you're going to take?
As a rule, we say that medication outside the United States will cost you half of what you pay here. And it's sort of unfortunate because if you think about it, we all support the R&D development of those meds here in the United States and pay higher price for that. But again, that's just, you know, I'm not arguing, I'm not saying it's bad or good, but I'm just saying that medication is a little bit more expensive than here than outside the United States. So if somebody...
let me interrupt. Would the patient be buying their medications here in the U.S. because they're starting the meds before, or do they go for the entire, or are they starting from the very beginning their cycle abroad? And if so, how long are they having to stay?
Sure. Basically, we have two options. And what we're seeing here, because we Americans do not have long vacations enjoyed by Europeans. So typically when people come to us and say, how long do we need to stay for the entire cycle, for cycle day one? We say 17 nights, 18 days. As a rule, again, because if we have a blastocyst transfer, so you have to stay 2 days extra. So what we have created, it's a special package for U.S.-based patients who want to travel outside the United States but would like to spend the first 8 days of their treatments here with the local OBGYN. So our doctors work very closely with local OBGYNs, and while local OBGYNs monitor those patients for the first day. So basically, the local doctor will send us the blood work, ultrasound results. Our doctors review those results immediately the same day and then adjust medication based on the test results. So if somebody like that starts IVF treatments locally, we say that the worst case scenario, you will spend another $1,100 on all meds, that, you know, stimulation meds and post-transfer meds with us. If you start the treatments on cycle day one, and we had a couple of patients who did that too, then the meds will be around $2,200. That should be the top amount that our patients would spend. But again, here, for instance, it's not unheard of for a patient to spend $3,500, $4,500 on the entire cycle.
It is unfortunate in the sense, when we think about it, that the R&D costs that are being borne by the pharmaceutical
American
companies
patients, yeah.
But that's a whole other topic for another show.
Absolutely. And again, there are pros and cons to everything, right?
And Laurie, now Taurus has given us somewhere around the $8,200. That would include not all the meds, so I'm guessing around a $10,000 type of thing for IVF abroad. What do you see? Now, I know you don't see as many people going abroad for IVF, but how significant is the cost savings if they were to choose to go abroad?
There are some places you can go. Turkey, for one, I know, is about $5,000 for everything, but you have to. That does not include travel costs. So, in general, you're looking at about $7,000 for a straight IVF, let's say in Turkey.
And does that include meds?
Yes, that would include meds.
Okay.
And Taurus is right. Typically, it's about half the price of what it would cost in the United States. Now Taurus mentioned that he's got, which this is great if you've found this, doctors here in the United States who help assist at the beginning of the cycle, so that an intended mom does not need to be away for 2 weeks. What we find, however, too, is across the United States, a lot of the top clinics are hesitant to do the beginning monitoring, which that is really unfortunate. But they feel strongly that the patient should not be leaving. Oftentimes, the patient is embarrassed to tell the doctor. So that's an area that we really are pushing. My partner Catherine and I are meeting with a lot of clinics and doctors and just explaining why it might be the right reason to help these women, as opposed to throwing them out there. They've got to find a gynecologist who has an ultrasound machine who can measure their lining. It's not that easy. So it certainly would be better if there were more clinics in the United States who would help people who have to go abroad. But like you asked about money. So in general, it's probably about half the price if you go for straight IVF somewhere else, if you go abroad for it.
Dawn, may I add something? Laura, interesting that you mentioned that clinics, local OBGYN clinics, are not willing to do this. Our experience is the opposite, because if you think about the process, typically IVF patients are considered high-risk patients, so OBGYN clinics lose them forever until they come back after delivery. So in our experience, we're seeing a lot of OBGYNs eagerly taking on our clients because they see a new revenue flow for their practice. So because our doctors provide the IVF protocol, they monitor everything. So the involvement is minimal. And most of I'll give you an example. Actually, on top of that, we have 2 IVF clinics in the United States who monitored our clients before they left for our clinic.
No, you bring up a very good point. You mentioned that most of them are OBGYNs. They're not IVF clinics or reproductive endocrinologists. Yes, we certainly have found several reproductive endocrinologists who realize that, again, this is revenue for them, and oftentimes if an intended parent starts here, does monitoring at a clinic here, goes abroad, if the cycle is unsuccessful, oftentimes they come back and stay with the clinic, the American clinic that helped to monitor them. So in the end, it ends up being a revenue source for the American clinic. But most of them don't see that right now. They see it fertility tourism, let's say, as a threat.
Absolutely. And there's a lot of arrogance in this field, too. I mean, I'll give you an example. One of the doctors here basically did not follow the protocol well, and she was OBGYN. So, again, it was, sort of like flaw in the process on everybody's front, but again, we picked up everything and everything was okay. But it's sort of interesting because many U.S. doctors are very arrogant and they don't feel that high-quality medical procedures exist outside the United States, and therefore their patients should not be traveling outside. So, yeah, that's common, too. That's a major barrier for medical tourism, and we deal with this on a regular basis.
Well, one thing I feel like the need to throw out there is that I think that oftentimes arrogance may play a part, but it's also because they might believe that the services that they're offering and their training and their embryologist and the full package that they're offering is not only better but might be safer, and that the odds might be more successful. So there's probably more than just arrogance that comes into play.
There's also... Oh, I'm sorry. I'm just going to interject one quick thing. There's also another reason the doctors, the IVF clinics are hesitant, and it's legal. Because if they take on a patient to do monitoring, and then the patient goes abroad, has a procedure done, comes back, if there's they're going to go to the monitoring clinic. So therefore, the IVF doctor takes on this added responsibility, even though he wasn't the main part of the process. So that is a reason why a lot of IVF clinics and REs are hesitant to get involved with this as well.
That's very true. At the ASRM conferences last year, I spoke with an RE, and she was saying that one of her frustrations is that when her patients go abroad, that she is still counseling them. Oftentimes, if it fails, they come back to her and they say, here's what they did, why did it fail? And she said, they have been patients of mine, so I feel an obligation to continue to talk with them and to try to help them figure it out. She said, but it's very time-consuming, and it's frustrating for them because I seldom have enough information with it to really evaluate. So, I think that there's some, probably logistical reasons there. What should a patient look for if in a clinic, if they are considering going abroad? Let's try to come up with some things that are important and that you think that they should look for. Taurus, if you'd like to begin on that one, and then Laurie chime in.
Okay.
Well, to start with, obviously the training and the experiences, not only REs, but also embryologists, because embryologists play a major role in the process. Obviously, the reputation of the clinic and how clean it is, where it's located, location, safety of the location, success rates, important. Having said that, we talked a lot about success rates, but if you think about this, some clinics here in the United States hesitate to take difficult cases or older cases because they don't want to have those cases affect their high success rates. We take on everybody pretty much who is willing to and capable, obviously, bearing a child. I'll give you an example. We have a patient who is 56 years old, and she's pregnant right now. So this actually talks about, it's a testament about the quality of the personnel at our clinics, but also, about the clinic's ability and willingness to take complicated, hard cases. So
you say
what
cleanliness.
else?
How in the world would somebody determine cleanliness?
Well, and again, there are many ways to do this, but like, for instance, our company, before we send anybody anywhere, we actually travel to the clinic, take pictures, and we have a Facebook fan page with pictures of our clinics on it. And obviously, again, companies like ours sort of do the groundwork for patients so that they don't have to go to Argentina or somewhere else, come there and realize that they don't want to go through their treatments because of A, B, and C. So, we take that element of surprise out.
How important do you think it is to find a doctor that speaks English, and then to take it a step further, because it's not just the doctor. Oftentimes, the primary person you're interacting with is the nurse. So how important, the second question would be, how important is it to find a nurse and other staff members that speak English? Laurie?
I think, to be honest, it's extremely important. Again, if you speak the language, because there are often, Americans who speak other languages. If you speak the home language, obviously that would be great. But if you don't, then it is very important to find somebody there who speaks English. Now, that's why companies like Taurus's are important, the fertility tourism companies, because they do the groundwork. And then we tell people, well, just do your homework about the tourism company. Make sure you know that it's a reputable one. But if you do your research and you find a reputable tourism company, that's probably the better way to go. But oftentimes people can't even afford that, so they need to go on their own. So if you're going on your own, what we say is, yes, communication is key. If you can't find somebody to communicate with properly and in a timely manner at the clinics that you're looking at, don't go. It's only going to get worse. What we find, the international clinics, the level of communication is different than what you get at American clinics. They're not used to hand-holding as much as the American clinics are. So oftentimes the Americans going abroad feel like they're out there and they're not getting any responses. So first of all, you have to allow for the fact that you're dealing with a different culture and that they do things differently. But if you can find somebody who will email and speaks fairly good English so that they understand your questions and can respond, that's extremely important. See if you can do a Skype with, actually the embryologists are the bigger people, especially in European clinics. then here in America it's the doctor, not the embryologist that you talk to, and when you go somewhere else, it's the embryologist. I think it's more important to find, let's say, the nurse coordinator who will speak English or communicate in English with you. She's the main one, or he, if it's a he, who will help you through the process, and I think it's incredibly important.
I couldn't agree more with Lori. Yeah, and again, I failed to mention communication, but I agree with you that communication is critical. And one of the things that we do, we play that role of nurse 24/7. I mean, it's not uncommon for us to get calls after 7, 8 p.m. every night because there are some questions that need to be answered immediately. And Lori is exactly, she is correct. You know, the communication sometimes differs from that here in the United States, and that's, again, when people have to sort of account for that as well.
Yeah, the cultural difference.
Yeah.
Laura, you mentioned doing your homework on what you're calling a tourism company, a medical tourism company. What are the things? So that begs the question of what type of homework should you do? What should you look for when you're choosing a company here in the United States to help you figure out the web of and walk you through going abroad for treatment?
I tend to say, obviously, speak with a couple. There aren't that many tourism companies out there for, medical fertility tourism companies, but there are a few, and they go to different places usually. So I would say talk to at least 3 of them. Get a sense of what they're about and how many cycles they do, how long they've been in business, have there been any cases against them, any legal actions against them, and then ask them for some references, to speak with some people who were successful. But I often say it's more important to speak with somebody who was not successful and find out what that experience was like. Now, again, it has to be with a grain of salt because the tourism company is not going to have you speak with somebody who had a horrible experience. That wouldn't be, in their interest. But it will help you to at least get a sense of how the people were treated, and especially if they're unsuccessful and they still had a good experience. To me, that's worth a lot more than the person who gets pregnant, because the person who gets pregnant will sort of forget a lot of things that happened because they don't really matter. The focus is, I got pregnant, I don't really care what happened there, whereas the person who didn't get pregnant and might have to think of going back again has a different experience.
And we often encourage, when getting references, to go onto forums. You can ask on the Creating a Family Facebook group, but there are also so many forums out there. Ask if people have had, just to mention the company you're thinking about, yes, or the country you're thinking about, or the clinic you're thinking about, and see what you get. These will be unsolicited. Now, the problem is, of course, when you're using the Internet, you don't really know who is responding.
Right.
And also, sometimes you have to wade through people who may have an unrealistic gripe. But it is, I think, important as a way of getting the references that you might not otherwise get.
Can I interject too? On Global IVF, we're actually just adding a new feature, and it's called Journeys. And what it is a personal experience, including video, pictures, blogging of one person's experience or two, going abroad for any treatment, going for IVF, going for egg donation, going for surrogacy. We're not paying these people anything. They're doing it because they want to share their experience. So some of them will be positive and some perhaps not so positive. But at least it's, again, a place you can go to find stories that are not just in the interest of the company or clinic they come from.
Yeah, and I do think that's important. Now, how many? Most people, it seems, go for just one trip per one cycle. Taurus, is it possible, and I guess it would only be in the countries that are closer, for people to come home and then go back for a second trip, or do most people go for the entire time and stay once they leave?
I'm not sure following you, Don. Can you rephrase the question?
Well, how many trips are necessary is the basic thing.
Okay.
Yeah, that's the basic question.
Well, we offer different packages, and actually, as a rule, most of the patients choose to purchase at least two cycle package. And the reason for that is, again, if it was up to us, we would give baby to everybody, and probably even for free. But it's just, it's not realistic. So, we try to work the hardest to, allow hopeful parents to become pregnant the first cycle. But often it takes 2 and 3 cycles. So what we do, 3 cycles, we haven't had anybody who went 3 cycles with us. But we had people who got pregnant from second cycle. And what we do, we offer, there are 2 different packages. They can purchase 2 cycles in one package, or they can purchase 1 cycle plus cryopreservation of the leftover embryos. And then at that point, if they don't get pregnant the first cycle, they have an option to pay an additional fee to actually, do a frozen embryo transfer during the second cycle. But it's a little bit less expensive than just the 2-cycle program, but it gives them an option to go back.
Well, one of the questions I do want to talk about is the whole cryopreservation options. Oftentimes, and for some people would even consider this the ideal, that after a one ovulatory stimulation cycle that they would have excess embryos to freeze. Now, is the only option that the couple has with these, if they end up with extra embryos, is their only option to freeze them and leave them at the clinic abroad, Lori, or is there a possibility for them to somehow get their embryos back to the United States?
We have had several people, we have a surrogacy agency, and we've had several people who have shipped embryos created abroad that were frozen, shipped them here to the United States. But it's a very difficult process because you're dealing with, we have FDA regulations, and if the embryos don't meet that criteria, it's difficult to get them in. So it's not easy. We don't really encourage that. In general, most people leave their embryos in the country where they're created, and if let's say they're lucky enough to be pregnant, they go back for a sibling cycle. But I did want to bring another thing up. The European clinics do not stimulate the either intended mother or the donor as much as we do in the United States. In the United States, because we don't have health coverage, the feeling is get as much as you can, even though it's obviously come down. The doctors are getting a little more conservative about it. They still try to stimulate the intended mother or the donor to definitely get enough for at least 1 fresh cycle, 1 frozen. If you go to Europe, where most of the time the IVF cycles are paid for by the country, it's a completely different process. They're not focused on getting as many eggs as possible the first cycle. They're basically looking to get 1 fresh cycle. It's less common to get a frozen cycle. So that's part of the cultural difference as well, and that has to be taken into account.
That is such a good point, because we tend to think of it in terms from the economics because of the way that we're paying for it.
Yes.
Most people are paying for it out of pocket, and therefore there's a maximization, a cost per embryo type of analysis that people are going through, and that is it seems to me that would be a very important question to be understanding before you select a clinic, because it does impact the economics for you, because in the United States, whether this should be the case or not, that is truly the topic of another show. Yes. Because there is some evidence that would indicate that excessive stimulation is actually counterproductive as to live pregnancy rate or live baby rate at the end of a pregnancy, if you're actually measuring that. But that we have talked about that on other shows, and we probably don't need to go into it here. I do want to talk, however, since we've alluded to the fact that the majority of people who go abroad are actually doing so with considering egg donation. And one of the things that's really important is to understand how much information you're going to have on the egg donor. So, Taurus, in the countries that you work with, what's the typical amount of information that's available for the intended parents? And is there any possibility for there to be an open or semi-open or non-anonymous, I think is probably the preferred term, form of egg donation if you go abroad?
As my econ professor in grad school used to say, the answer to every question should be, it depends. So in our case, it's the same thing. It depends. It depends on the clinic. We have clinics that only share information like blood type, weight, height, education, basic racial characteristics. And on the other side of the spectrum, we have a clinic that shares genetic testing, pictures, has answers to probably a dozen or so questions that allows prospective parents actually to learn a little bit more. We had a patient who wanted to actually meet her egg donor, and we certainly advised against that for various reasons. But you can see that, again, on one side of the spectrum, we have relatively minimal amount of information for our clients, and then also a great deal of information that we share with our clients. And, there are different schools of thought on that too. Like, for instance, the clinics that don't share a lot of information, they just say it's just not good for prospective parents. And we Americans, we want as much as possible. So, again, I completely understand that. Like, for instance, I'll give you an example. We convinced one clinic to start offering pictures and basic description of the profile after, we talked to them the first time, and they said, there's no way, we don't do it, it's not our policy.
Well, I would just throw out that one of the other things, too, that we all should be considering is it's not just the issue of information for the intended parents. There is also a strong body of evidence. Well, I shouldn't say evidence because actually I'm not really sure, quite frankly, there's been much research done on it. But there's at least a vocal group of children who are now adults who were conceived through donor sperm who believe that it is their right to have this information, and that there is a big push by this group that it is within that more information should be shared, not for the intended parents, but for the intended children.
Dawn,
yes.
I just wanted to say, too, that's a reason why some countries you cannot go to for egg donation because it cannot be anonymous anymore. But in general, the European countries that are available to, actually not just European, the countries that are available to Americans for egg donation, it's usually legal for them. It's law that it has to be an anonymous situation, and the most you would find out is like what Taurus was saying, particular information about height, weight, education, like he was saying. Now, what we find is this is where I disagree with Taurus. In the United States, it's actually becoming the right thing to do to have some communication with your egg donor, whether it be over the phone or meeting in person. And the clinics are gearing, and the agencies here in the United States have more and more intended parents who are doing that. Whereas the internationals say, oh, it's not a good thing for you as an intended parent. What we're finding here in America, what the psychologists are saying, is it is a good thing. It's a good thing to know that this is a real person that you're dealing with. You're just getting her eggs, so there's no connection, there's no relationship, but that you're able to answer questions when your children grow up. So that's the biggest problem we find that the intended parents have to struggle with, that they have to give up, in a sense, when they go abroad for egg donation.
I agree with you, and I think that there are more parents now who are realizing that they may, even if they aren't certain that they want contact, they want that option in the future in case their child wants it. Yes. And that is something that, from my experience, if you go abroad, I think you almost totally give up. Even if, in theory, the clinic says that they will that they will have that information on file, you have no guarantee whether there'll be any attempt to update that information or if even the egg donation. Go ahead.
But I'm all for sharing as much information as possible. Actually, this is good to hear what you were telling me, because we'll do some research and hopefully get some research papers and pass it on to the clinics that we work with, so we can share as much information as possible with the prospective clients.
So we've talked about now the cost for IVF going abroad. Lori, can you give us a range? You indicated that the greater cost savings are going to be not with IVF but with egg donation. So how much, and I realize it was probably a range here, how much does egg donation cost if you go abroad?
Okay. Well, typically in the United States, let's start with that. In the United States, you can typically expect to spend anywhere from, let's say, $20,000 up to, I don't know, $40,000, even higher, for an egg donation cycle here at a reputable clinic, let's say, using an egg donor agency, paying the cost for the egg donor, et cetera, et cetera. When you
That's
go
including
abroad,
her cycle and your cycle. You're talking total cost, right?
Yeah, total cost for everything, medication, her fee, the egg donor agency fee, et cetera. When you go abroad, you're looking at a range of probably between $5,000 and $10,000, and oftentimes it can be on the lower end. So it's a significant savings, and that's the draw. A lot of people don't have, $25,000 to spend, and oftentimes when people are turning to egg donation, they're already in their 40s, and they don't have time to waste. They don't have time to sit around and save up money for a couple of years and then, in 4 years go do the egg donation cycle. They want a child now, and they're, considered a bit older, so it makes more sense to then look internationally.
Yeah, and one thing that may shift some of this, and we just did a show on this, and I thought it was fascinating, is the whole concept of egg banking. Since now the technology for cryopreserving human eggs has certainly improved, and it's bringing the cost down, but we are not there, and certainly not all clinics are there. One of the things that you alluded to before that I want to make sure we touch on, and that is the egg donors themselves are coming from the country where you're going. Therefore, from the ethnicity standpoint, many couples want a donor that looks like one of them. And I suppose that's, I just wanted to mention that now, that's something you need to think about when you're choosing a country, is because that would be the more typical ethnicity.
I wanted to bring one thing up on that. Actually, there are people who take an egg donor from, let's say, South Africa. Some Israeli, I'm not going to say a lot, but Israelis are known to do this. Take an egg donor from South Africa, bring her to Greece, Spain, a clinic there. So it's not, we are seeing that happen.
Good point.
Okay, but in general, you can continue. You're right. Most people want the egg donor to have at least aspects of one of the intended parents.
In the very short time we have left, I want to touch on something that is really near and dear to my heart, and actually in one of the focuses of creating a family, and that's to raise awareness of the risk to both the mother and especially to the children of multiple pregnancies. We focus a lot on that issue and how many embryos to transfer. In the U.S., there are at least guidelines based on age and diagnosis on how many embryos to transfer. How is this handled in other countries? Taurus, in the in the clinics you work with, how is this handled?
Dawn, our clinics follow the guidelines and standards of American Society of Reproductive Medicine, so we follow the same rules and regulation and standards and guidelines that IVF clinics follow. I'll give you an example. We would never transfer more than 2 embryos unless there is an indication for that, or there's a good reason for that.
Well, let me interrupt a second because we have such a little time left. I know that that's not the case everywhere. There was a 2009 study in the UK published, in the International Journal of Obstetrics and Gynecology that found that 26% of the women in the study had triplets and higher. Of the multiple births. Let me back up. Of the multiple births, 26% had treatment abroad. This will be our last question. How, in your experience, Lori, what do you see, and is this something that the patients need to be aware of before they go?
I absolutely think patients should be aware of it and they should advocate for themselves. A multiple pregnancy is not good. Even though, again, Americans want big bang for their bucks. So people think twins is great, 2 for the cost of 1. It's not. It's absolutely not. The safest pregnancy is a singleton. What we found, however, is that a lot of the European clinics that we know or that we've heard about and done more research on are actually a little more conservative because, again, they're used to the cycles, being able to do multiple cycles on a person because the cost is lower. So they tend not to put as many embryos as an American clinic might put back. So I'm
European.
seeing it a little more conservative.
Yeah, but that's European,
yes.
And that's not necessarily where the majority of people
yes.
are going to be
going
to be going. Yeah, so that is something that we will be augmenting our resources on creating a family for cross-border reproductive care, and we will make certain that we address that issue. Thank you so much, Taurus Kuzin and Laurie DeBrito, for being our guests today on Creating a Family.
My pleasure.
Taurus, could you give us the website, please, for Med Vacations? If anybody wants more information on Med Vacation, they can go to the website. And what is it, Taurus?
TheMedVacation.com, like article, THE, medvacation.com.
TheMedVacation.com. And to get more information on Laurie's group, Global IVF, you would go to globalivf.com. This show will be archived on the 2011 Big List at the radio page of creatingafamily.org, and it's also available for a download as a podcast from iTunes. You can reach it on the iTunes Store, or you can click on the iTunes button on our radio page. Either way, you can download it. To stay in touch with the latest developments in infertility or adoption, as well as receiving the upcoming week's blog and show topic, you can sign up for our weekly newsletter at creatingafamily.org. Thanks for joining us today, and I will see you next week.